the situation in Yemen, because we have been attacking into Yemen here. We've started a new campaign the Trump administration has. Trump vows to, quote, annihilate the Houthis and warns Iran against support as U.S. strikes Yemen. According to this article in the Times of Israel today, U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday said Yemen Iran-backed Houthi rebels will be completely annihilated, warning Tehran against continuing to provide aid to the group during an ongoing U.S. military campaign against them. Quote, Iran must stop the sending of these supplies immediately. Let the Houthis fight it out themselves. Either way they lose, but this way they lose quickly. Trump posted on his social truth platform. Trump has said a number of things here lately, specifically on the Houthis, but every time he seems to mention the and as do Secretary of State Rubio and some others, focused on the Iran connection, giving some people the concern that this may be laying the groundwork for a joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. How do you see this?
Just before I answer that question, all this talk about annihilating the Houthis is ridiculous. How are you going to annihilate the Houthis? You're going to kill every Houthi? The only way you can do that is with nuclear weapons. We're not going to use nuclear weapons against the Houthis. Trump thinks that by bombing the Houthis that you're going to annihilate them and that's going to end the Houthi threat or the so-called Houthi threat. This is delusional. It's just a reflection of how crazy our discourse is about national security affairs. Now, with regard to your question about Iran, I think there are two ways of looking at this, which are actually complementary. I think, one, that we are threatening Iran in a serious way here because we would like to coerce Iran into reaching an agreement that's acceptable to Israel with regard to the Iranian nuclear program. Trump, I believe, does not want to fight a war against Iran. He'd rather settle the Iranian issue diplomatically. But I think he understands that he has to settle it because of pressure from Israel and the Israel lobby here in the United States. So they're threatening Iran in a serious way for coercive purposes. But my second argument is they're also sending a signal to Iran that they're ready to fight. It looks to me like if Iran doesn't cave to our demands, that we will, with the Israelis, use military force against Iran. The rhetoric here certainly points in that direction. And given the extent to which Israel basically owns Donald Trump, I don't see how he could avoid a war with Iran if Iran doesn't get on its knees and concede to Donald Trump's pressure.
So let me ask you about the threat Iran plays, because obviously it's an open secret. Israel has nuclear weapons. They continue to just really pump up this regional threat of Tehran, making them sound like a 9-foot giant in the region. But my assessment of Iran and what they have done has been the past really 16 months since the Israeli-Hamas war has been going on, is the revelation of just how weak Iran actually is. I mean, they've had all of their proxies just like decimated or at least severely gashed, and they have literally been able to do nothing to stop any of it. And every time they've had a choice, like had their embassy blown up or had Israeli missiles fire into their country, their response has been very, very calculated and to limit the expanse. So they have shown that they don't want any kind of a war with Israel. So the question is, what extent does Iran genuinely play or a threat to Israel?
Well, if you're Israel, for completely understandable reasons, you don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. You don't want any country in the Middle East to have a nuclear weapon. Is it likely that Iran would use that nuclear weapon against Israel? No, it is not. Is it possible that Iran would, in certain circumstances, use that nuclear weapon or use its nuclear arsenal against Israel? The answer is yes. That possibility is always there. And the fact that that possibility is always there gives the Israelis really good reason to not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. And the taproot of the problem here, Danny, is that Iran has the ability to enrich uranium, which it is doing, and it has the ability to reprocess plutonium, which it's not doing. But the fact that it has those two capabilities means it can rather easily develop a bomb. And what the Israelis want to do is they want to take away Iran's capability to enrich uranium and reprocess plutonium. And one of the reasons that the Israelis were so unhappy with the JCPOA in 2015, and that, of course, is the nuclear agreement with Iran, was because it did not take away Iran's enrichment or reprocessing capability. And the Israelis and the Americans want to take that away. And the question you have to ask yourself is, can we coerce the Ukrainians, and not the Ukrainians, excuse me, can we coerce the Iranians into giving up that capability? I think the answer is no. I don't think that the Trump administration's efforts to threaten and try to coerce Iran are going to work. And then the question is, what do we do next? And it looks to me, I hope I'm wrong, but it looks to me like the United States and Israel will put their gun sights on Iran, and they'll launch an attack against Iran's nuclear facilities.
I want to show you something that Trump said regarding Iran earlier this month that might be kind of illustrative.
You know, we're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. It's an interesting time in the history of the world. But we have a situation with Iran that something's going to happen very soon. Very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other. But the other will solve the problem.
Will the other solve the problem, though? Yeah, because let me ask you, from the international realist hat, putting back on here, and not even just as an American, but just as someone who's an expert at diplomacy, is there a better way to get Iran to decide on their own not to go to a nuclear weapons program?
Well, the best way, this is not to say it definitely would work, but the best way to get Iran not to develop nuclear weapons is to remove the threat. It's for Israel and the United States to stop threatening Iran. The more you threaten Iran, the greater its incentive to acquire nuclear weapons. That makes perfect sense. In my opinion, the smart strategy would have been in 2015 to accept the JCPOA. I think Israel should have accepted the JCPOA and then encouraged the United States and worked with the United States to improve relations with Iran and to take the gun sights, take Israel and America's gun sights off of Iran, because that would have greatly diminished Iran's incentive to acquire nuclear weapons. But by constantly threatening Iran and even attacking Iran, and remember the Israelis attacked Iran twice in 2024 with attack aircraft, you just incentivize Iran to get nuclear weapons. One could argue it's surprising that Iran doesn't already have nuclear weapons, given the threat presented to Tehran by both Israel and the United States. But you can't sell that argument in Israel or in the United States, right? Because both the Israelis and the United States, or both the Israelis and the Americans, have this deep-seated belief in big stick diplomacy, the idea that you can use military force to get your way, either through coercion or through an actual attack. And if you listen to Trump talk, Trump, who tends not to believe in big stick diplomacy as much as most people in the American national security establishment do, Trump there in that clip you were playing sounded like he believes in big stick diplomacy. You know, he's given the Iranians a chance. He hopes that they agree to do away with their nuclear capability. But if he doesn't, well, I'll just have to go in and solve this problem, and you can be assured that I'll solve the problem. It's his argument.
Yeah.
Well, I would tell him he can be sure that he will not solve the problem, that he will only make a bad situation worse.
Right, and that's exactly where I was going to go, because both many in the United States, obviously, like John Bolton or the previous Secretary of State of the Trump administration, Pompeo. I mean, they're just like advocates, almost like obsessed with thinking that they can solve the problem through military means. But I think it's just the opposite would almost certainly happen, because for very many tactical reasons. In the last few minutes here, though, there's one other issue I want to touch on here, which I think comes in the same exact category of what a big stick can't produce, and that is military victory against Hamas, which apparently Benjamin Netanyahu now wants to try.
Together with the Minister of Defense, I accepted the IDF's recommendation to return to a forceful fighting against Hamas. From now on, Israel will fight against Hamas with more and more power, and the negotiations will, from now on, be under fire. Hamas already felt our force, and I'd like to promise them this is only the beginning. We will continue to fight in order to get all the goals of the war, returning all our hostages, destruction of Hamas, and the promise that Gaza will no longer be a threat for Israel.
I mean, we had whatever it was, 16 months of full-on war for Israel to try. And then they got the ceasefire, and then all of a sudden we discovered how much of the Hamas military structure itself survived the ghastly destruction of the Gaza Strip. Now, of course, they've gone back under the ground. Apparently, they were able to even rebuild some of those tunnels during the onslaught. If he didn't succeed in the first 16 months, why does he think he's going to succeed going forward? I mean, what is the rationale here?
Well, I think that he's not telling you what the real goal is. The real goal is not to destroy Hamas. The real goal is to ethnically cleanse Gaza, or to murder almost everybody who lives in Gaza. That's the real goal here. They can't defeat Hamas unless they drive all of the Palestinians, which would include Hamas by definition, out of Gaza. That's the only way they defeat Hamas, by driving the Palestinians out. And what the Israelis are trying to do is achieve that goal. You want to remember that at the end of the first phase of the ceasefire, right, what the Israelis then did was began let me put it differently. They restarted their starvation policy. Before they invaded and before they started the bombing, they had restarted the starvation policy. You want to think about what's going on here. They are purposely trying to starve the Palestinian population in Gaza to death. And on top of that, they've started bombing again. And on top of that, they sent in ground forces. Yeah. The name of the game here again is to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And the Israelis are actually quite clear about this in private. They don't advertise it in the West because they play all these propaganda games in the West. But that's really what's going on here.
Can that succeed? Can they succeed at doing that? Because this stuff is not hidden. It's out there in the open. They actually have promoted that they had stopped all the aid, et cetera. You saw Netanyahu there is quite openly saying they're ready to use now the big baseball bat to continue to crush and destroy Hamas, et cetera. But I mean, you don't see any action anywhere else to anybody to stop them. So it seems to me that unless someone compels them to stop, they're going to continue on. So the question is there any force or pressure or anything else that would prevent them from trying to accomplish that goal?
I hate to say this, but I don't see any. I don't see any checking mechanism here. You want to remember that for probably about 15 months, they were executing a genocide in Gaza, a genocide. This is a case where you have an apartheid state, and Israel is an apartheid state, executing a genocide. And what did the United States of America do? It was complicit in that genocide under Joe Biden and now under Donald Trump. So this tells you that if the Israelis killed or murdered even more Palestinians, substantially more Palestinians, and used military force to drive them out of Gaza, the Americans would probably support them. Certainly, it looks like the precedents tell you that would be the case. I want to believe in my heart of hearts that that wouldn't be the case, that we have enough collective decency that we would tell the Israelis that they can't murder all the Palestinians in Gaza. But when I look at our behavior up to now, I'm not confident that that would be the case.
And real quick, in just the last few minutes we have here, what about Turkey, Jordan, or Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar? Collectively or individually, might any of those take any actions if that starts to happen?
Hard to see what they can do. They don't have the military capability to challenge Israel. And furthermore, the United States has huge coercive leverage over a lot of those countries, especially Jordan and Egypt, because they're economically dependent on us. And then, you say, well, maybe one country can't do it, but what if they get together and all 3 or 4 of them act in unison? I just don't see that happening. The collective action problems are too great. I mean, maybe it's possible that the Saudis and the Gulf states would say enough is enough, and they'd put an oil embargo on the West. I don't think that's likely either. I think that Benjamin Netanyahu basically understands that he has carte blanche here, and that he can do almost anything he wants to the Palestinians. Genocide is a problem.
Well, yeah, I guess. So far that's been the case. I guess we'll see how this is going to go. I just can't see this ending well for any party, Israel, certainly the regimes or the United States, and definitely not for the Palestinian people. It's just hard for me to see how this ends well for anyone. I can't. And the final question is, do you see, and take the morality out of it for a moment, is there any military path to where Israel can have peace and contentment in the Middle East if they move on that path right there?
Well, one could argue that if they're successful at driving almost all of the Palestinians out of greater Israel, they solve the apartheid problem. And given how powerful they are, and given the fact that they're joined at the hip with the United States, they don't face any serious external threats, except for maybe Iran, and working with the Iranians and working with the Americans, the Israelis can shut down the Iranian nuclear threat, and the Iranians will not be a serious problem for Israel, and therefore Israel's security position will be improved greatly. I believe this is how Netanyahu thinks. Do I think it's going to work out this way? No, I don't. I think that it's going to be a failure, and I think as time goes by, Israel is going to find itself in deeper trouble than it already is in.
Yeah, that's the way I suspect it's going to work out too, which is why I'm so opposed to this course of action, because I just think that the chances of it working out well are incredibly small. And even if it came at the expense of hundreds of thousands or possibly even millions of other people, it's not worth it anyway. But we'll have to leave it there for right now. But as always, we really thank you for coming on and giving us your great insights onto this. And we really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Danny. Thank you for having me.
And always appreciate you guys. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on the way out. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.